Drunk Amelia spends a night with a stranger. She doesn't know he's a powerful billionaire who wants her forever. Hello, wonderful people. Welcome back to Alcott Stories, where love, passion, and deep emotions come to life. Before we dive into today's heart-touching and romantic story, I want to take a moment to say thank you to each and every one of you who support my channel, watch my stories, and share your love in the comments. Your encouragement means the world to me. If you're new here, welcome to the family. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an amazing love story filled with twists, romance, and emotions that will stay with you forever. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy this unforgettable journey. Make sure to watch till the end. You won't want to miss a single moment. Let's get started. Enjoy the story. A love shattered. Amelia Carter sat motionless on the edge of her bed, her brown eyes staring blankly at the phone in her trembling hands. The screen glowed with undeniable proof of betrayal. Texts, pictures, and worst of all, the video. The video that had shattered every dream she had carefully built with the man she had loved for the past 4 years. Her boyfriend, Jake, the man who had once sworn his undying love for her, was kissing another woman. No, not just any woman, but her co-worker, Rebecca. The same Rebecca who had pretended to be her friend. The same Rebecca who had smiled at her, shared coffee breaks, and even given her advice on how to keep a man happy. Amelia's heart pounded against her ribcage as she replayed the moment over and over. The way Jake had touched Rebecca, the way he had laughed, the way he had whispered in her ear, the same way he used to whisper to Amelia. Her stomach twisted into painful knots, and a lump formed in her throat. How could he? How could he destroy everything so easily? A sob broke free from her lips as she flung the phone across the room. It hit the wall with a dull thud, falling onto the carpet. But the damage had already been done, not to the phone, but to her heart. Tears blurred her vision as she curled into herself, wrapping her arms around her knees. She had given Jake everything, her love, her trust, her time, and yet he had thrown it all away like it meant nothing. The room felt suffocating, the silence too loud, the pain too overwhelming. She had to get out. She had to breathe. A friend's intervention. Amelia barely noticed the knock at the door. She was too lost in her own misery, too caught up in the storm raging inside her. But the knocking grew louder, more persistent. "Amelia, open up," came the urgent voice of Lisa, her best friend. Reluctantly, Amelia dragged herself to the door and pulled it open. The moment Lisa saw her, her expression softened. "Oh, honey," Lisa sighed, stepping inside and pulling Amelia into a tight hug. "I saw the messages. That lowlife doesn't deserve you." Amelia buried her face in Lisa's shoulder, fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. "I thought he loved me, Lisa. I thought I was enough." Lisa gently pulled back, cupping Amelia's face. "You were more than enough. He was just too blind to see it. But you know what? Tonight is not about him. It's about you, and I know exactly what you need." Amelia wiped her tears, confused. "What?" Lisa grinned mischievously. "A night out. A girls' night. No crying over losers, no moping. Just fun, music, and a little bit of alcohol." Amelia shook her head immediately. "No way, Lisa. You know I don't drink, and I'm not in the mood for—" Lisa grabbed her hands. "Amelia, you need this. You need to stop thinking about him, even if just for a few hours. Let's go out, have some fun, and remind yourself that you are amazing, with or without Jake. Amelia hesitated. The idea of going out felt exhausting. But at the same time, the idea of sitting in her room, drowning in heartbreak, seemed unbearable. With a deep breath, she finally nodded. Okay, but just for a little while. Lisa beamed. That's my girl. Now let's get you dressed. We're going to Club Eclipse, and trust me, you're going to look stunning. The transformation. Amelia stared at herself in the mirror, barely recognizing the woman looking back. Lisa had worked her magic, dressing her in a sleek black satin dress that hugged her curves perfectly. Her usually braided hair was let down in soft waves, and her deep brown eyes were highlighted with just the right amount of makeup. She felt different, maybe even a little powerful. Lisa whistled. Damn, girl. If Jake sees you like this, he'll regret everything. Amelia gave a small smile, but deep inside, she knew she wasn't doing this for Jake. She was doing it for herself. A night that changes everything. The moment they stepped into Club Eclipse, Amelia felt the bass of the music vibrate through her chest. The place was packed, neon lights casting colors across the dance floor. Laughter, conversations, and the clinking of glasses filled the air. Lisa grabbed her hand. Let's get drinks. Amelia hesitated, but finally gave in. One drink wouldn't hurt. One turned into two, then three. For the first time in her life, Amelia let loose. She laughed freely, danced without caring, and allowed the alcohol to blur the sharp edges of her heartbreak. She felt light, free. But as the night went on, something shifted. The room spun slightly, and she found herself bumping into someone. Strong hands caught her waist, steadying her. She looked up, her vision hazy from the alcohol, and met the most striking blue eyes she had ever seen. A stranger who radiated power, confidence, and something else she couldn't quite place. Amelia's breath hitched. Who was he? And why did her heart suddenly race at the sight of him? Little did she know, this one reckless night would change her fate forever. A man who owns the world. The VIP section of Club Eclipse was filled with the city's elite, powerful businessmen, politicians, and celebrities, all indulging in expensive drinks and whispered conversations. Among them, Alexander Knight sat with his usual, composed, commanding presence. At just 33, Alexander was one of the youngest and most influential billionaires in the country. He had built his empire from the ground up, turning his father's struggling company into a global powerhouse. A man who controlled industries, a man who never lost. Yet, despite the luxury and power surrounding him, he felt nothing. His blue eyes scanned the club lazily as his business associate, Damien Carter, droned on about the newest merger proposal. With this deal, we could monopolize the tech industry in less than 2 years, Damien said, tapping his fingers on the glass table. But of course, that all depends on your final decision. Alexander barely heard him. Business had always been his priority, but tonight, something was different. Something was pulling at him, and then he saw her, a vision in the crowd, across the club, under the neon lights. She stood like a dream, a beautiful brown-skinned woman with long, silky braided hair, a figure that exuded effortless grace, and eyes that held both pain and fire. His gaze sharpened. He had seen many women before, models, socialites, heiresses, women who threw themselves at him for his wealth, his name. But she was different. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't flashing a fake smile or seeking attention. Instead, she seemed lost, as if she were trying to escape something. Then he noticed the slight stumble in her steps, the way she pressed a hand to her forehead as if the world around her was spinning. She's drunk. Alexander's jaw tightened. He didn't know her, but suddenly an unfamiliar urge surged through him, an urge to protect her, an uncontrollable pull. She's stunning, isn't she? Alexander's gaze snapped to Damien, who smirked knowingly. Who? Alexander asked, feigning disinterest. Damien chuckled. Come on, Alex. I've known you long enough to recognize that look in your eyes. The woman in the black dress. She's got you hooked. Alexander exhaled slowly, rolling the whiskey glass between his fingers. I don't get hooked, Damien. You know that. Sure, Damien said, with an amused smirk. But that's the first time I've seen you staring at a woman instead of a business report. Alexander ignored him, but his gaze remained on her. His sharp instincts noticed everything. The way her friend laughed beside her, trying to keep her steady. The way other men in the club were starting to notice her too, some looking at her with less than innocent intentions. A slow, unfamiliar burn spread in his chest when one man, a tall, well-dressed stranger, started approaching her. Alexander's patience snapped. He put down his drink. Excuse me, he said, already moving before Damien could respond. The first meeting. Amelia felt lightheaded. The drinks had numbed the heartbreak. But now, she wasn't sure if she was walking or floating. Lisa was laughing beside her, still dancing, but Amelia needed air. She stepped away from the dance floor, her heels clicking against the polished floor as she made her way toward the exit. But the moment she moved, her world tilted. She swayed slightly, her balance unsteady, and then, before she could fall, strong hands caught her waist. A deep, smooth voice whispered near her ear. Careful, beautiful. The words sent a strange shiver down her spine. Amelia's breath hitched as she looked up and locked eyes with the most mesmerizing blue eyes she had ever seen. For a moment, the noise of the club faded. Everything else disappeared. The man before her was breathtaking, tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in an elegant black suit that fit his muscular frame perfectly. His dark, stylish hair was slightly tousled, and there was a raw intensity in his gaze that made her heart stutter. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Alexander tilted his head, studying her with an unreadable expression. Are you all right? Amelia swallowed hard. Who was this man? Why did his touch make her skin burn? I think I need some fresh air, she murmured. Without hesitation, Alexander gently took her hand. Come with me. And before she could even question why she felt so safe with a stranger, he led her toward the exit, away from the watchful eyes of the club, away from the past that haunted her, and into a night that would change everything. A moment that changed everything. The night air was crisp as Amelia stepped outside the club, her mind spinning from the drinks she had downed in a desperate attempt to numb her heartbreak. But the alcohol hadn't erased the pain. It had only made her reckless. Her breath was uneven, her body light, as if she were floating. The warmth of the stranger's hand in hers grounded her, but she barely registered what was happening. She stopped abruptly and turned toward him, blinking up at the impossibly handsome man who had led her outside. His blue eyes glowed under the streetlights, dark and intense, watching her with an unreadable expression. For a fleeting second, the world stood still. Then, her alcohol-clouded mind betrayed her. Jacob, she whispered, her vision blurry. Alexander frowned slightly. Who? But Amelia wasn't listening anymore. The pain in her chest was suffocating. The betrayal, the heartbreak, everything came rushing back. The man standing before her was tall, strong, and comforting. His hands were warm against her skin, his presence overpowering. She didn't stop to think. She kissed him. An electrifying kiss. Alexander's entire body tensed the moment her lips crashed against his. For a second, he did nothing, completely taken aback. No woman had ever dared to touch him so boldly. Then, a jolt of electricity shot through him, igniting something primal and uncontrollable. Her lips were soft, warm, and desperate. She tasted of whiskey, wildness, and something entirely her own. Something intoxicating. Alexander's mind screamed at him to pull away. She was drunk. She didn't know what she was doing, but his body had a mind of its own. Before he realized it, his hands gripped her waist, pulling her closer. Her curves molded against him perfectly, her scent, vanilla and jasmine, driving him insane. He deepened the kiss, his lips moving against hers with an intensity he didn't understand. Why did she feel so familiar? So right. The moment was raw, unplanned, and dangerously addictive. A shocking realization. Suddenly, Amelia whimpered softly against his lips, a broken, heart-wrenching sound. The sound snapped Alexander out of his trance. With sheer willpower, he pulled away, breathing heavily. Amelia swayed slightly, her hands still resting on his chest. Her brown eyes blinked up at him, filled with confusion and pain. Alexander swallowed hard. What the hell just happened? She looked dazed, lost, and suddenly the realization hit him. She had kissed him, thinking he was someone else. A sharp pang of possessiveness surged through him. "Who is Jacob?" he asked, his voice low and demanding. Amelia frowned, pressing her fingers to her temple as if trying to gather her thoughts. I don't know. Liar." Alexander's jaw clenched. He wanted to know who had hurt her, who had made her drink until she lost herself. But now wasn't the time. She was too intoxicated to answer properly, too vulnerable for him to push further. She shivered slightly in the cold, and instinctively, he shrugged off his expensive suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The gesture was intimate. It startled Amelia, who looked up at him with wide eyes. "Why are you being nice to me?" she murmured. Alexander exhaled, running a hand through his dark hair. He didn't have an answer. All he knew was that he didn't want to let her go. Not now, not ever. The beginning of an obsession, Alexander had never believed in fate. He believed in control, power, and strategy. But this woman, this one reckless, heartbroken woman, had shaken something inside him. His fingers brushed against her cheek, and he saw the exhaustion in her eyes. She needed rest. "Come with me," he said, his voice softer than he intended. Amelia hesitated. "Where?" "To my hotel." "You need sleep," he said simply. She blinked. Was he serious? She barely knew him, and yet, standing here in his warmth, wrapped in his expensive jacket, she felt safer than she had in years. Her mind was screaming at her to refuse, but her heart, the broken, bleeding thing inside her, whispered something else. Maybe, just for one night, she didn't have to feel so alone. Maybe, just for once, she could let go. With a shaky breath, she nodded. Alexander's lips curled into a smirk. He had her now, and he wasn't planning on letting her go. A whisper that changed everything. The city lights twinkled like fallen stars as Alexander guided Amelia toward his waiting car. The cool night air kissed her flushed skin, but she hardly noticed. Her mind was spinning, her body light from the alcohol. And yet, she felt something unexpected. Safety. She didn't know this man, and yet, His touch didn't feel threatening. His deep, commanding voice had a strange way of calming the storm inside her. As he helped her into the sleek black car, she leaned in, her warm breath brushing against his ear. "I feel safe with you," she whispered drunkenly. Alexander froze. His hands, strong and sure, tightened slightly on her waist. The words struck him harder than he expected. No woman had ever said that to him. Most saw him as untouchable, powerful, dangerous. They feared his influence, craved his wealth, but no one had ever looked at him the way she did. With trust, he swallowed hard. Why did that simple confession shake him? His arms dropped reluctantly as he stepped back. She had no idea who he was. Maybe that was the most intoxicating thing of all. Without another word, he closed the car door and slid in beside her. This night was only beginning. The penthouse, a dangerous sanctuary. The ride to his penthouse was silent, except for the soft hum of the engine. Amelia's head rested against the cool window, her eyelids fluttering as exhaustion crept in. Alexander stole a glance at her. She looked so delicate, so heartbreakingly vulnerable. Her long dark braids cascaded over her shoulders, framing her flawless brown skin. Her full lips, slightly parted in sleep, stirred something deep inside him. For the first time in years, he felt an urge he couldn't control, the need to protect. The car came to a smooth stop in the underground parking lot of his luxurious penthouse. Not a single paparazzo in sight. This was his sanctuary, a place no one entered unless he allowed it. With practiced ease, he lifted Amelia into his arms. She stirred slightly, her fingers curling into his shirt as if seeking warmth. You smell nice," she murmured sleepily. Alexander's lips twitched. She had no idea she was wrapped in the arms of one of the most powerful men in the country, and he had no intention of telling her. Watching over her, Alexander carried her inside, the automatic lights illuminating the modern, sleek interior. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the breathtaking city skyline. But tonight, he had no interest in the view. His sole focus was the woman in his arms. Gently, he laid her down on the massive bed, removing her heels with careful precision. She sighed, curling into the soft sheets, completely trusting him. His chest tightened. What was this woman doing to him? He wasn't a man prone to emotions. He never let himself get attached. But something about Amelia felt different. He sat on the edge of the bed, watching her breathe. A lock of her braided hair had fallen across her cheek. Without thinking, he reached out, brushing it back. Her skin was warm beneath his fingers. Software. Too soft. His thumb lingered a second too long. Amelia shifted, a small smile playing on her lips. "Jacob," she murmured in her sleep. Alexander's entire body stiffened. That name again. A flush of jealousy ignited inside him. He hated the way she said it, with longing. Who the hell was Jacob? His fists clenched. He had no right to be angry, but the possessiveness was instant, irrational, and consuming. He didn't like sharing, not even with a ghost from her past. A billionaire's obsession begins. Hours passed, but Alexander didn't move from his spot. He should have left, should have gone to his study, poured himself a drink, and distracted himself with business. But he didn't. Instead, he sat there, watching her, every rise and fall of her chest, every little movement she made. And with each passing second, his obsession grew. She had entered his life like a storm, unpredictable and impossible to ignore. He didn't believe in fate, but tonight, something told him this woman was meant to be his. Not for a night, not for a fleeting moment, forever. And Alexander Knight always got what he wanted. A confusing awakening. Amelia stirred as the first rays of sunlight streamed through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. A warm breeze fluttered the sheer curtains, and the distant hum of the city buzzed below. Her head bounded. A deep groan escaped her lips as she shifted under the impossibly soft sheets. Everything smelled expensive, like fresh linen, subtle cologne, and something she couldn't quite place. She blinked, her brown eyes adjusting to the unfamiliar surroundings. Where am I? The room was massive, modern, and breathtaking. Elegant decor, sleek furniture, and a view that stretched across the entire skyline. Her heart pounded against her ribs. This isn't my apartment. Her gaze darted across the space, searching for clues. The last thing she remembered was drinking at the club, Lisa convincing her to let loose. And then, her eyes widened. The stranger, the one with piercing blue eyes, the one who had caught her when she stumbled, the one she had. Her breath hitched. Oh my God. Her fingers flew to her lips. She had kissed him, right there, in the middle of the club, like she was some reckless party girl. Panic surged through her. What else had she done? Her hands trembled as she lifted the silky sheets, peeking underneath. Relief flooded her chest when she realized she was still fully dressed, just missing her heels. She exhaled shakily. Okay, nothing happened. At least, nothing beyond a drunken mistake she would rather forget. But why had he brought her here? She needed to get out before. Her stomach twisted as she heard the sound of a door opening. She turned sharply. And then she saw him. The man behind the mystery. He stood in the doorway, effortlessly commanding the space with his presence. Tall, broad-shouldered, unfairly attractive. His medium-long, dark hair was still slightly tousled, as if he had run his fingers through it 1,000 times. The sharp angles of his jawline only highlighted the striking contrast of his piercing blue eyes, eyes that were currently locked onto her. In his hands, he carried a tray with fresh croissants, a steaming cup of coffee, and a bowl of fruit. He looked amused. "Good morning," he said smoothly, his voice deep and velvety. "I see you're finally awake." Amelia swallowed hard. He remembered her. She barely managed to process his presence, let alone the fact that she had woken up in his penthouse. Her pulse raced. She stammered, gripping the sheets tighter. "I don't usually wake up in strange places." His lips twitched. "And yet, here you are." Her cheeks burned, cocky. He walked toward her, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he was enjoying her discomfort. He placed the tray on the bedside table before taking a step back. "You don't have to look so panicked," he added. "I assure you, nothing inappropriate happened." Amelia exhaled sharply, her shoulders sagging in relief. "Then why am I here?" she demanded. His eyes glimmered with mischief. "You were drunk. You told me you felt safe with me. I couldn't just leave you alone in that state, could I?" She frowned. "You could have called my friend. Or a cab." His smirk deepened. "I could have, but I didn't." Her breath caught. Something about the way he said it sent a shiver down her spine. A battle of wills. Amelia squared her shoulders. "I appreciate the hospitality, but I should go." She swung her legs over the bed, feeling the cool marble under her bare feet. Before she could take a step, he was already in front of her. His hand shot out, gripping the bedpost beside her. He wasn't blocking her, not completely, but his presence was impossible to ignore. "Leaving so soon," he murmured, tilting his head. At least have breakfast first. Her stomach growled, betraying her. Damn it! She hesitated. He raised an eyebrow, as if daring her to refuse. She wasn't sure what annoyed her more, his confidence or the fact that he had a point. With an exasperated sigh, she folded her arms. Fine, but only because I'm starving. He chuckled. Smart choice. As he handed her the coffee, their fingers brushed. A spark shot through her. She sucked in a breath, but he didn't seem fazed. Instead, his blue eyes darkened, just for a fraction of a second. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the moment was gone. The mystery deepens. As Amelia took a bite of the croissant, she couldn't help but study him. There was something about this man, something intense. Everything about him screamed power, control, mystery. Who are you? She finally asked, watching him over the rim of her coffee cup. He leaned back slightly, a ghost of a smirk playing on his lips. Just a man who happened to be in the right place at the right time, he said casually. Her brows furrowed. A vague answer. Do you bring random women home often? She challenged. Something flickered in his gaze. Number, you're the first. Her heart did an unexpected flip. Why did that make her breath hitch? She quickly shook the thought away. This was just a one-time thing. She would never see him again. Right. A goodbye. Or not. Minutes later, Amelia slipped on her heels, ready to leave. Thank you, she said, trying to keep her tone polite but distant. For looking out for me. His gaze lingered on her, unreadable. Any time, Amelia. Her breath caught. She had never told him her name. Her heart slammed against her ribs as realization hit her. Who is this man? Before she could ask, his phone rang. He answered smoothly, turning away. She seized the moment. Without another word, she rushed out, away from the man who made her heart race, away from the danger of wanting more. She had no idea that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. A name that lingers. Amelia's heels clicked softly against the marble floor as she hurried through the grand penthouse toward the exit. Her heart pounded, her mind racing with questions. How did he know my name? She was certain she hadn't introduced herself. Yet, when he had said it, Amelia, it had rolled off his tongue so smoothly, like he had known her forever. A shiver ran down her spine. She didn't even know his name. And that was how it should be. A clean break, a mistake erased. She exhaled sharply, gripping the doorknob, leaving in such a rush. His voice, deep, velvety, teasing, made her pause. She swallowed hard, but didn't turn around. I have work, she lied, her fingers tightening around the cold metal. A soft chuckle filled the space between them. I see, he mused. You don't even know my name, do you? Amelia hesitated. He was right. But did it matter? Names made things personal. Names made things real. And this was nothing but a drunken mistake. A mistake she would bury. She forced a polite smile and turned slightly. You were kind to me, and I appreciate that. But let's just leave it at that. For the first time, something flickered in his piercing blue eyes. Something dark, something unreadable. But then, his smirk returned. As you wish, Amelia. She hated the way her name sounded so perfect in his voice. With a final nod, she yanked the door open and stepped into the private elevator. She didn't dare look back. If she had, she would have seen the way his gaze followed her, intense and unwavering. Alexander's growing obsession. The moment the elevator doors slid shut, Alexander leaned against the doorway, arms crossed over his broad chest. He had watched many women walk away in his lifetime. None had ever made him hesitate. Until now, she was different, not because of her beauty, though she was breathtaking, not because of the kiss, though it still lingered on his lips, but because she didn't care who he was. Women usually threw themselves at him the moment they discovered he was Alexander Knight, billionaire, CEO of Knight Enterprises. They faked smiles, feigned innocence, and practically begged for his attention. But Amelia, she hadn't even asked his name. She wanted to forget him. That fact alone sent a dangerous thrill through his veins. A smirk played on his lips. Too bad for her. Alexander Knight never let go of something he wanted, and right now he wanted Amelia. Amelia's escape, or so she thought. The city air was crisp as Amelia stepped out of the high-rise building, the morning sun warming her skin. Her breath came in shaky gasps as she flagged down a taxi. She needed to get away, far away from the man with haunting blue eyes and an intoxicating presence. As the taxi pulled away, she leaned against the seat, pressing a hand to her chest. What was wrong with her? She barely knew him, yet her skin still tingled where his fingers had brushed against hers. Her lips still burned from that reckless kiss. She groaned, covering her face. Get it together, Amelia. This was nothing. She would go back to work. Forget last night ever happened. After all, what were the chances she would ever see him again? 0. At least, that's what she thought. She had no idea that Alexander Knight wasn't done with her yet. Not even close. A name that holds power. Back in his penthouse, Alexander poured himself a glass of whiskey, swirling the amber liquid slowly. He was a man of power, a man who built empires with a single decision. And yet, here he was, thinking about her. That had never happened before. He pulled out his phone. With a few taps, he accessed his private database. Amelia Carter. The moment her name popped up on the screen, a slow, satisfied smirk stretched across his lips. Fashion designer, talented, struggling, independent, and completely unaware that she had just stepped into his world. He downed his drink in one smooth motion. If Amelia thought she could walk away from him that easily, she was about to learn just how dangerous it was to captivate a man like Alexander Knight. A dream opportunity. Amelia stood outside the towering Knight Enterprises building, staring up in awe. It was a masterpiece of modern architecture. Glass panels reflecting the sky. Its sheer height making her feel small yet hopeful. This was her dream opportunity. Landing a job at Knight Enterprises would change everything. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her portfolio, taking a deep breath. You belong here, Amelia. You worked for this. She had no idea fate had other plans for her today. No idea that she was about to come face to face with the one man she had been trying to forget. The CEO's identity, a shocking revelation. Inside the grand lobby, Amelia gave her name at the reception. The CEO will see you now, the assistant said with a polite smile. Amelia's brows furrowed. The CEO. She thought she was meeting the hiring manager. Swallowing her nerves, she followed the assistant to the top floor, where only the most powerful people in the company worked. Her heart pounded as she stepped into a lavish office. Floor-to-ceiling windows, mahogany desk, a commanding presence, and then her world stopped, because sitting behind that desk, watching her with a knowing smirk, was him, Alexander Knight, the stranger she had kissed, the man whose touch still haunted her, her potential boss. The air felt thick, charged with an undeniable intensity. She clutched her portfolio tightly, her breath uneven, Alexander leaned back in his chair, his piercing blue eyes locking onto hers. Well, well, he murmured, his voice like silk and danger combined. Amelia's pulse skyrocketed. What kind of cruel twist of fate was this? Amelia's panic versus Alexander's amusement. For a long, tense moment, neither of them spoke. Amelia's entire body heated with embarrassment. Of all the people in the world, why him? Her mind raced, trying to figure out what to say, how to act. But before she could form a sentence, Alexander broke the silence. This is an interesting surprise. His voice was deep, teasing. I must say, I didn't expect to see you again. Like this. His words made her stomach twist. Was he enjoying this? Amelia straightened her posture, forcing herself to stay professional. I wasn't aware you were the CEO. Alexander's smirk deepened. He liked seeing her flustered. Well, now you know. Amelia swallowed hard. This was bad. She needed this job. She couldn't let a reckless, drunken night ruin her future. Taking a deep breath, she pushed her personal emotions aside. I appreciate the opportunity to interview, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Alexander chuckled, his gaze still locked on her, like a predator studying its prey. Let's not pretend, Amelia. He leaned forward, resting his arms on the desk. We both know this isn't just a normal interview. Amelia's throat went dry. What did he mean by that? The interview becomes a game. Alexander wasn't just interested in her skills. He was intrigued by her. He wanted to test her, so he leaned back and said smoothly, Tell me, why should I hire you? Amelia blinked, thrown off by his sudden shift into professionalism. She quickly gathered her thoughts and launched into her carefully prepared speech. I have 5 years of experience in fashion design, specializing in innovative trends. I believe my creative vision aligns with Knight Enterprises. And, do you always talk this formally? Alexander interrupted, tilting his head. Amelia's cheeks burned. This is a professional setting. Alexander smirked. Yes, it is. But I prefer authenticity. She clenched her jaw. What kind of interview was this? Was he testing her patience? Or was this something else? Her fingers curled around her portfolio as she forced herself to stay composed. If you want authenticity, Mr. Knight, here it is, she said, her voice steady. I've worked hard for years to build my reputation in the fashion industry. I'm passionate, determined, and I don't let setbacks define me. If you hire me, you'll get someone who puts everything into their work. For the first time, Alexander's expression shifted. Something flickered in his gaze. Admiration. She wasn't just another woman who was enchanted by his wealth or charm. She had fire, and that made her even more irresistible. An offer she can't refuse. After a long pause, Alexander finally spoke. You're hired. Amelia's eyes widened. What? Just like that? But I didn't even finish my presentation. Alexander chuckled. You didn't need to. He stood up, walking around the desk until he was right in front of her. She sucked in a breath. He was too close, too intense. You're talented, Amelia, he murmured, and I always get what I want. Her heart pounded. Was he talking about the job or something else? Alexander's smirk deepened. I'll see you Monday morning. Amelia knew she should feel happy. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But as she left his office, her mind raced with one thought. Had she just stepped into something she couldn't escape? Because the way Alexander had looked at her told her this was just the beginning. A battle between heart and mind. Amelia sat at her new desk in Knight Enterprises, trying to focus, but her mind refused to cooperate. How could she, when the man who haunted her dreams, the man who made her pulse race with just a look, was only a few doors away? Alexander Knight, her boss, her temptation. For days now, he had been relentlessly pursuing her, and despite her best efforts, she was falling. She didn't want to. She couldn't afford to. But her heart wasn't listening. Alexander's unstoppable pursuit. At precisely 11 a.m., a delivery arrived at her desk. A single red rose. No note, no sender. But Amelia didn't need one. She knew. Her pulse quickened as she glanced at Alexander's office. Through the glass walls, he was already looking at her, smirking. Amelia's breath caught. This was dangerous. He was relentless, and he wasn't even trying to hide it. That same afternoon, as she walked to the break room, she heard his deep voice behind her. Amelia. Her body stiffened. She turned slowly, meeting those piercing blue eyes. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. Have dinner with me. Her heart slammed against her ribs. I don't think that's appropriate, she managed, gripping her coffee cup tightly. Alexander tilted his head, studying her. You kissed me first, remember? His voice was teasing, but his gaze was intense. Now, you're running. Her cheeks burned. That damn drunken mistake. She straightened her shoulders, forcing herself to remain composed. That was a mistake, Mr. Knight. Alexander's smirk deepened. A mistake, he murmured, leaning in slightly. Then why do you keep looking at me like that? Amelia's breath hitched. She was trapped. Trapped between what she wanted and what she knew she shouldn't have. The first invitation and her resistance. The next day, an email popped up in her inbox. From Alexander Knight. Subject, an invitation. Amelia, join me for a charity gala tomorrow night. Black tie. I'll send a dress. Don't overthink it. AK. Amelia stared at the screen. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Number she couldn't. Being alone with him, in a glamorous setting, dressed in something expensive. It was too much. She quickly typed, I appreciate the offer, but I must decline. Thank you. She hit send before she could change her mind. Less than a minute later, another email arrived. From Alexander Knight. I admire your resistance, Amelia. But you should know, I always win. Her stomach flipped. What was that supposed to mean? The dress and the weakening resolve. The next evening, Amelia arrived home to find a box waiting at her doorstep. Her breath caught. She already knew who it was from. Heart pounding, she opened it, only to find the most exquisite, breathtaking evening gown. It was deep red, silky, elegant, designed to make her feel like a queen. And attached to it was a note. Wear this tonight. I'll be waiting. AK. Her fingers trembled as she ran them over the delicate fabric. He wasn't giving up, and worse, she was running out of excuses to resist. The gala and the moment of weakness. Amelia shouldn't have gone. She should have ignored the dress, should have deleted his emails. But there she was, standing at the entrance of the grand gala, dressed in the gown he had chosen for her. And the moment Alexander saw her, everything changed. His usual smirk disappeared. His piercing blue eyes darkened. He walked toward her slowly, his gaze never leaving her face. You look. His voice was hoarse, stunning. A shiver ran down her spine. This was too much, too intense. She should turn around. She should leave. But then Alexander held out his hand, and against every warning in her mind, Amelia placed her fingers in his. The moment their skin touched, a spark shot through her. Her breath caught. So did his. And as he led her onto the dance floor, pulling her against him, she knew. This was the beginning of something dangerous, and there was no turning back. The doubt creeps. In the night at the gala had changed everything. Amelia felt it. Alexander felt it. But even as she lay in bed that night, her heart still racing from his touch, a quiet voice whispered in the back of her mind. Why her? She was just a regular woman, a fashion designer struggling to make a name for herself. And Alexander, he was a billionaire, a man with the world at his feet. Men like him didn't chase women like her, did they? Her phone buzzed on her nightstand. A message from Lisa. Call me first thing in the morning. It's important. A sense of unease curled in Amelia's stomach. The warning. The next day, Amelia met Lisa for coffee. Lisa's expression was serious. Are you really getting involved with Alexander Knight? She asked, her voice laced with concern. Amelia hesitated. I don't know. It's complicated, Lisa sighed, sliding her phone across the table. Then you need to see this. Amelia's eyes widened as she saw the headline on the screen. The ruthless billionaire, Alexander Knight's darkest deals exposed. Her stomach dropped. The article was brutal. It painted Alexander as a merciless businessman who crushed anyone who stood in his way. A man with no mercy, no heart. Was this the same man who had looked at her like she was his whole world last night? Lisa leaned closer. Amelia, people say he's dangerous. You need to be careful. Amelia's mind spun. Was she making a mistake? The storm brewing. Back at work, Amelia struggled to focus. She avoided Alexander, buried herself in work, and tried to silence the growing doubts. But he noticed. By midday, a message popped up on her screen. From Alexander Knight. Come to my office. Now. Her pulse spiked. Taking a deep breath, she made her way to his office. Alexander was waiting, arms crossed, his blue eyes sharp. You've been avoiding me. Her throat went dry. I've been busy. His jaw tightened. Try again. Amelia hesitated, then finally blurted out. I saw an article about you. Something flickered in his eyes. She pressed on. It said you're ruthless, that you destroy people. Is it true? Alexander exhaled slowly. Then, in a voice lower than she'd ever heard, he said, I don't regret my choices, Amelia, but I would never hurt you. Her heart pounded. She wanted to believe him. But before she could say anything, his phone rang. He answered, his expression instantly darkening. What do you mean she's being followed? He growled. Amelia froze. Who was being followed? Then Alexander's gaze snapped to hers, and her blood ran cold. A target on her back. Minutes later, Amelia sat frozen as Alexander's security team briefed him. She's been followed twice today, one of the guards reported. We have reason to believe someone is watching her. Amelia's heart pounded. Why? She whispered. Alexander's expression was stone cold. Because of me. Fear coiled in her stomach. Who's after me? His jaw clenched. My enemies. Her breath caught. Enemies? Alexander reached for her hands, his grip firm. I won't let anything happen to you. But Amelia wasn't sure. She had stepped into a world far darker than she ever imagined. And now, there was no way out. The escape to paradise. The world outside was chaotic. Danger lurked in the shadows. But tonight, none of it mattered. Alexander had promised Amelia a night away from the madness. A night where there was no billionaire, no business, no enemies. Just them. And now, as his private jet touched down on a secluded island, Amelia's breath caught. The villa before her was breathtaking. Lanterns flickered along a stone pathway, leading to an oceanfront mansion that seemed to belong to a dream. The waves crashed softly in the distance, and a warm breeze carried the scent of salt and jasmine. She turned to Alexander. His blue eyes held something she couldn't quite define, something intense, something dangerous. Tonight was going to change everything. Dinner beneath the stars. A candlelit table awaited them on the villa's terrace. Soft music played in the background, blending with the rhythmic sound of the waves. Alexander pulled out her chair, his fingers grazing her skin. The electricity between them was undeniable. "Do you like it?" he asked, watching her reaction. Amelia swallowed. "It's perfect." Alexander smirked. "You deserve perfect." Her heart stuttered. She wasn't used to men treating her this way. She wasn't used to being cherished. As the night unfolded, Amelia found herself opening up in ways she never had before. They laughed. They shared stories. With every passing moment, the attraction between them burned hotter. The first touch, after dinner, Alexander led her through the villa. The suite was stunning. A king-sized bed, draped in silk sheets, a private balcony overlooking the moonlit ocean, and floor-to-ceiling windows that bathed the room in silver light. Amelia's pulse quickened. She turned to Alexander, and the moment their eyes met, everything shifted. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. His fingers traced along her jaw, lifting her chin so their eyes locked. "You're so beautiful," he murmured. Her breath hitched. She had never wanted someone like this, and judging by the hunger in his gaze, Alexander felt the same. Surrendering to the fire, his lips brushed hers, soft at first, then demanding. Amelia melted into him, her hands gripping his shirt as his arms wrapped around her. The world outside faded. Nothing existed beyond the heat between them. Alexander's kisses traveled to her neck, igniting a fire deep within her. Her fingers slid through his dark, silky hair, pulling him closer. He groaned against her skin. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, his voice thick with restraint. She shook her head. "Don't stop." A growl rumbled in his chest as he lifted her effortlessly, carrying her toward the bed. She felt weightless, desired, completely his. A night unlike any other. They spent the night lost in each other. Alexander worshipped her, treated her like a queen. Every touch, every kiss sent her spiraling into a world she had never known before. He took his time, ensuring she felt safe, adored, and cherished. Amelia had never experienced this kind of passion. She had never felt so alive. As dawn approached, she lay in his arms, tracing patterns on his chest. Alexander pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You're mine now, Amelia." Her heart skipped a beat. She should have been scared. She should have questioned what he meant. But in that moment, wrapped in his arms, she felt safe. Little did she know, danger was just outside the villa, and their night of passion had just made her an even bigger target. The morning after Amelia woke to the warmth of Alexander's embrace, the soft glow of dawn painted the room in golden hues, and for the first time in a long while, she felt happy, safe, loved. His. She turned to look at him. His chiseled face was relaxed in sleep, dark lashes resting against his cheeks. He looked almost innocent like this. But love was blind, and fate, it was cruel, because just when Amelia thought she had found something real, the world had other plans. A whispered warning. As she slipped out of bed, careful not to wake him, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message. Unknown. Number. "Do you even know the truth? Or are you just another one of his games?" Amelia frowned, her heart pounding. Another message popped up, followed by a link. Unknown number. See for yourself. Her hands trembled as she clicked the link. A video played. The shocking truth. It was a recording. Alexander, sitting in his office with a group of men, laughing. His voice was unmistakable. She's different, isn't she? One man teased. Alexander smirked. Oh, she's definitely a challenge. But that's what makes it fun. The air left Amelia's lungs. I wanted to see how long it would take before she fell for me. Alexander continued. A brown-skinned beauty like her. I knew she wouldn't trust me easily. But trust me, boys. They all fall eventually. Laughter erupted in the room. The video ended. Amelia felt like the ground had been ripped from beneath her. Was this a lie? A setup? But Alexander's voice had been too clear, too real. She clutched her stomach, feeling like she might throw up. The night they had shared, was it all just a game? Shattered love footsteps. She turned. Alexander stood in the doorway, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. Good morning, beautiful, he murmured, his voice deep and affectionate. Amelia stiffened. Beautiful. The same word he had probably used for countless others before her. She couldn't breathe. You okay? He asked, stepping closer. She flinched. Alexander froze, confusion clouding his blue eyes. Amelia. She lifted the phone, pressing play on the video. The moment Alexander heard his own words, his face drained of color. No. Amelia, let me explain. Her rage exploded. Explain? What exactly do you want to explain, Alexander? She shouted, stepping back as he tried to approach. That you played me. That I was just some challenge to you. It wasn't like that. His voice was desperate, his hands clenching into fists. Tears blurred her vision. Don't lie to me. She had been stupid. So stupid. She had let herself believe that he was different, that he loved her. But all along, she had been nothing more than a game. Her chest ached as she grabbed her bag. Amelia, wait. Alexander reached for her, but she recoiled. Don't touch me. She turned away before he could see her tears, before he could break her any further. Desperate apologies, Alexander stood frozen as the door slammed shut. He had never felt fear before. Not in boardrooms, not against ruthless competitors. But the thought of losing Amelia, it terrified him. Damn it, he roared, throwing a vase against the wall. How could he have been so stupid? He never meant for things to go this far. When it started, yes, he had been intrigued, challenged, but then something changed. She had changed him. Amelia wasn't just another woman. She was the only woman. And now he had lost her. The chase begins. Amelia stormed through the villa, barely seeing where she was going. She needed to get away, far away. But before she could reach the gates, Alexander's security stopped her. Miss Amelia, move, she snapped, eyes burning. We have orders. I don't care. Before they could react, she slipped past them, sprinting down the pathway. A car waited near the dock. She didn't care where it took her. She just needed to escape. Behind her, she heard Alexander's voice. Amelia, stop. But she didn't. She climbed into the car, slamming the door shut. And as the driver sped off, leaving Alexander behind, her tears finally fell. This time, she wasn't just crying over betrayal. She was crying because she had truly, deeply loved him. And now, she could never forgive him. A man on the edge, Alexander was drowning. Not in water, not in business losses, but in regret. Amelia was gone, and the hollow ache in his chest only grew worse by the second. He had searched for her everywhere, her apartment, her office, even Lisa's place. But she had vanished. And the worst part, she hated him. For the first time in his life, Alexander Knight, the ruthless billionaire, felt powerless. Until the call came. A chilling, merciless voice on the other end. "We have your woman." His blood turned to ice. "If you want her alive, Mr. Knight, you know what to do." Then the line went dead. The ruthless truth. Alexander clenched the phone in his hand, his jaw tightening. He knew exactly who was behind this. Vincent DeLuca, a rival billionaire with a vendetta. A man who had tried to destroy Knight Enterprises for years. And now he had Amelia. Alexander's heart pounded. This wasn't just business anymore. This was war, and he would burn the world to get her back. Amelia's nightmare. Amelia's wrists burned from the ropes binding her hands. Her head throbbed, and when she tried to move, pain shot through her body. Where was she? The last thing she remembered was leaving Lisa's apartment. Then, darkness. Now, she was tied to a chair in a dimly lit warehouse, the stench of gasoline filling her nose. Fear clutched her throat as heavy footsteps echoed in the room. Vincent DeLuca. A cruel smirk twisted his lips. "Well, well, look at you, Miss Amelia." She lifted her chin, refusing to show fear. "What do you want?" she demanded. Vincent chuckled. "I don't want anything from you. But your boyfriend." "Oh, he owes me a lot." Amelia's stomach twisted. This wasn't about her. This was about Alexander, and she was just a pawn in their twisted game. Alexander scramble. Alexander stormed into his office, barking orders. "Track DeLuca. Now!" His men worked fast, scanning security cameras, tracing calls. Every second that passed was another second Amelia was in danger. Then, a breakthrough. A warehouse near the docks. Alexander didn't hesitate. He grabbed his gun and headed out. There would be no negotiations. He was getting his woman back. The showdown. The warehouse was dark, the air thick with tension. Alexander stepped inside, his gun raised. Vincent was waiting, his men scattered around him like shadows. Amelia sat in the middle of the room, tied to a chair, her eyes filled with defiance. Alexander's heart clenched. "Let her go," he ordered. Vincent smirked. "Oh, Knight, you think you can just walk in here and make demands?" Alexander's finger tightened on the trigger. "I don't think. I know." A single gunshot rang through the air. Vincent's bodyguards lunged forward, but Alexander's men stormed in, guns blazing. Chaos erupted. The sacrifice. Amelia's heart pounded as gunfire echoed around her. She struggled against the ropes, fear gripping her chest. Then, a scream. "Alexander!" He had been shot. Blood spread across his white shirt, but he didn't stop. He fought through the pain, knocking Vincent to the ground. With one final punch, Vincent collapsed, unconscious. But Amelia only saw Alexander, bleeding, struggling to breathe, crumpling to his knees. Tears blurred her vision as she ran to him. "Hold on, please," she cried, pressing her hands against his wound. He smiled. Even now, in pain, he was smiling. "Had to save you," he whispered, his voice weak. A sob escaped her lips. "Don't you dare die, Alexander Knight. Don't you dare." Love that can't be denied. Hours later, at the hospital, Amelia sat by his bedside. She hadn't left his side, not even for a second. His fingers twitched, and slowly, his blue eyes fluttered open. The relief hit her so hard, tears spilled down her cheeks. "You're awake," she whispered. His lips curled into a weak smirk. "Missed me." A broken laugh escaped her. Then, without thinking, she threw herself into his arms. "You idiot! You scared me to death." His arms wrapped around her, holding her close. I'd do it again, he murmured against her hair. Amelia pulled back, staring into his eyes. The pain, the love, the devotion. It was all there. Why, she whispered. Why risk everything for me? His fingers brushed her cheek. Because I love you. Her breath caught. No hesitation. No games. Just truth. The man who had once played with her heart had just risked his life for her. And suddenly, she knew. Despite everything, despite the pain, she loved him too. A new beginning. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of roses and the distant hum of ocean waves. Amelia stood on the balcony of Alexander's private villa, her heart still racing from the chaos they had survived. She still couldn't believe it. He had risked everything for her. He had nearly died for her. And now, she was here, in his arms, safe and cherished. A gentle breeze lifted her long braids, and she turned her gaze to him. Alexander Knight, the ruthless billionaire, the man she had once believed was playing with her heart, the man who had just proved his love in the most undeniable way. His piercing blue eyes held a tenderness she had never seen before, and when he reached for her hand, a soft shiver ran down her spine. Are you okay? His deep voice rumbled, filled with concern. She nodded. I am now. His lips curved into a smile, but there was something in his gaze, something different, something intense. A night of perfection. Alexander had been planning this moment for days. Even when he was lying in that hospital bed, recovering from his gunshot wound, he had only one thought in his mind, Amelia. And tonight, he was going to make her his forever. He had arranged everything perfectly. The villa's rooftop was transformed into a paradise, twinkling fairy lights, cascading white roses, and a pathway of candles leading to the infinity pool overlooking the ocean. A violinist played a soft melody in the background, and the full moon cast a silvery glow over the setting. Amelia gasped as he led her up the final step. Alexander, she whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. Do you like it? He asked, his voice soft. She turned to him, emotion swirling in her brown eyes. It's breathtaking, but why? He took a deep breath. Because tonight, I change everything. Confession of a Billionaire. Alexander gently took both of her hands, his touch warm and reassuring. When I first met you, Amelia, I didn't know what love was. Her breath hitched as she gazed up at him. I spent my life building an empire, making ruthless decisions, and guarding my heart. I never let anyone close. I never thought I needed love. A lump formed in her throat. But then, a drunken, beautiful woman stumbled into my arms, kissed me without knowing who I was, and turned my world upside down. A soft, breathless laugh escaped her lips. His thumb brushed over her knuckles as he continued. You made me feel things I never thought I was capable of feeling. And when I nearly lost you, his voice cracked slightly, I realized I can't live without you. Amelia's heart pounded. Was this really happening? Was Alexander Knight, the untouchable billionaire, finally surrendering his heart? He took a step back, his piercing blue eyes never leaving hers. Then he dropped to one knee. A love that's forever. The world stopped. Amelia felt her heart freeze, then explode with emotions she couldn't contain. Alexander pulled out a velvet box, slowly opening it. Inside was the most exquisite ring she had ever seen, a stunning sapphire stone encircled by diamonds, glistening under the moonlight. I never believed in fate, he murmured. But meeting you changed everything. Tears welled in her eyes. I don't just want you in my life, Amelia. I need you. Her breath came in short gasps as he whispered the words she never expected to hear. Marry me. A sob of happiness escaped her lips. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she stared at the man who had once been a stranger and was now her everything. Alexander, she whispered, overwhelmed. His eyes searched hers, waiting, hoping. I love you, she finally said, her voice breaking. I love you so much. His jaw clenched with emotion. Then say yes. A tearful smile broke across her face. Yes, yes, I'll marry you. The moment the words left her lips, Alexander surged to his feet, capturing her in his arms. Their lips met in a deep, passionate kiss, one filled with promises, love, and a forever they never saw coming. The violinist played louder, fireworks lit up the sky, and the ocean waves crashed in harmony with the beating of their hearts. Tonight, Amelia was no longer just a woman he met by accident. She was his future, his forever, his everything. The wedding of the century. The day had finally arrived. Amelia stood in front of the grand, full-length mirror, her heart pounding as she gazed at her reflection. She looked breathtaking. Dressed in a custom-made, off-shoulder white gown that shimmered with delicate crystal embellishments, she felt like she had stepped into a fairy tale. Her brown skin glowed with radiance, her braided hair styled elegantly, intertwined with pearls. Her brown eyes held a mixture of excitement, nervousness, and pure love. Today, she was marrying Alexander Knight, the billionaire who had once been a stranger, the man who had become her everything. Lisa, her best friend, walked up behind her, eyes brimming with emotion. You look like a dream, she whispered. Amelia let out a shaky breath. I still can't believe this is real. Lisa grinned. Oh, it's very real. And the way that man looks at you, you're his entire world. A tear slipped down Amelia's cheek, but before it could fall, Lisa quickly dabbed it away. None of that. Your makeup is perfection, and you need to be flawless when you walk down that aisle. Amelia laughed softly, her heart swelling with joy. She had never imagined a love like this, and today she would be forever his. The moment of a lifetime. As the grand doors of the cathedral opened, a hush fell over the guests. All eyes turned to Amelia, but her eyes searched for only one. And then she saw him, standing at the altar, dressed in an impeccably tailored black tuxedo. Alexander Knight had never looked more handsome. His medium-long dark hair was slightly tousled, his chiseled jaw clenched with raw emotion, and his blue eyes, they held only her. As she walked down the aisle, time seemed to slow. Every step she took, his gaze never wavered. There was no billionaire, no business empire, no fortune. There was only Amelia and Alexander. When she finally reached him, his hands trembled slightly as he took hers. You are stunning, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. She smiled up at him, her heart melting. The priest began the ceremony, but Amelia barely heard a word. All she could feel was Alexander, the warmth of his hands, the intensity of his love. And when it was time for their vows, Alexander turned to her, his blue eyes shining. Vows that shook the world. Amelia, he began, his voice unwavering, but filled with deep emotion. I never believed in fate or love until you. Her breath caught, tears welling in her eyes. You walked into my life like a storm, turning everything I knew upside down. You taught me what it means to love, to cherish, to fight for something more than just power and success. A tear slipped down her cheek, but this time she let it fall. Alexander took a deep breath. And today, I vow to love you for the rest of my life, to protect you, cherish you, and never let a single day go by without reminding you that you are my heart, my soul, my everything. A soft sob escaped her lips. Then it was her turn. She swallowed the lump in her throat, looking into the eyes of the man she loved. Alexander, she whispered, her voice shaking with emotion. I never thought I would find a love like this. I never thought someone like you could love someone like me. His jaw clenched, his love for her burning in his eyes. But you proved me wrong. Every day, you show me what it means to be truly loved, to be cherished, to be someone's entire world. Her voice broke. And today, I vow to love you with all my heart, to stand beside you in every storm, to be your strength, your peace, your home, because you are my forever. Tears shimmered in Alexander's eyes. He had never cried in his life, but for her, he would. Forever is as the priest pronounced them, husband and wife, the entire cathedral erupted in applause. But Amelia didn't hear any of it, because the moment Alexander pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, the world disappeared. It was a kiss filled with promise, with passion, with a love so strong, nothing could ever break them apart. When they pulled away, breathless, Alexander leaned his forehead against hers. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, he whispered. A tear slipped down her cheek. And you are mine. With that, he swept her into his arms, carrying her down the aisle as their guests cheered. But Amelia only saw one thing: the man she loved, the man who would always love her, forever. Their first dance as husband and wife. That night, under a canopy of twinkling stars, Alexander led Amelia onto the dance floor. Soft music played, the ocean waves a gentle melody in the background. As they swayed together, lost in each other, Amelia sighed happily. This is all so perfect, she murmured. Alexander pressed a kiss to her forehead. It's just the beginning, he whispered. And as they danced, lost in their own world, the stars above seemed to shine just a little brighter. For they knew this love story was one for the ages, and it would never end, because Amelia was, and always would be, forever his.